Over the recent days, we have learned of tragedy that has struck in Washington, D.C. and here in Philadelphia. We heard about the aircraft accidents that took place and the lives that were lost as a result of that, as most recent as last night right here in Philadelphia. So we would just like to take a moment of silence just to reflect on those who have lost their lives and those family members who are mourning at this time. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. In honor of Black History Month, thank you for joining us for the 8th annual Lonaé A Forum. It begins with us fostering racial understanding. We welcome our virtual Zoom audience and welcome everyone who has joined us here today. My name is Lonnie Harrismore III, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as your Master of Ceremonies for today. I also serve as the Vice President of Marketing for the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, and I'm a 7th-generation direct descendant of the Perkins Dennis family. I'm pleased to have joined with me, as always, my lovely wife, Shantae, who's sitting down there. My son, thank you. My son, Lonnie, the fourth, is on his way, and we are looking forward to his attendance. The theme for this year's forum is the Declaration of Independence and Equality. The forum itself is named after our late twin daughter, Lonaé Ashley Moore, who is or was an 8th-generation direct descendant to this family. Lonaé was a lovely young lady who attended our very first forum, which was held at Keystone College in 2018. And a few weeks following, sadly, we lost her to injuries she sustained due to an automobile accident, which was just 6 days shy of her 21st birthday. At the time, Lonaé attended Delaware State University and was studying criminal justice. She enthusiastically worked as an intern for the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, learning the history and making herself available for whatever she was asked. After her passing, we decided that we would dedicate future forums in her name to keep her memory alive and to encourage other young people to explore their family history. Lonaé, thank you for sharing your love for life with everyone you encountered. Your memory will be forever cherished, and may you rest in peace for all eternity. Now, if we have any high school or college students joined here with us today, I would like to extend a special welcome. I know that it's not easy giving up your Saturdays. I do remember the days, but we trust that you will find today's discussion time well spent. So if that's you, please stand and be recognized, or if you're streaming, please comment that in the chat. We would like to know exactly who is here representing our student population. There they are. Give them a round of applause. We are so pleased to have all of you here in attendance, and hopefully you'll find today's panel discussion to be enlightening and enjoyable. We have some special guests here as well. I'd just like to acknowledge very briefly, we have board members that are here, Patty Jepson and Wade Katz. If you're here, please stand and be recognized. Right here, there they are. And also I have some special friends of mine over here that we are part of our fraternity mentorship program identified by the Kappa League. So we have a couple of members here from the Philly Kappa League. Please stand up if you recognize here. Very pleased to have you all. Now, before we get started, please make sure that your phones are on silent or vibrate mode so as not to interrupt the panel discussion. And now it is my privilege to invite Adrienne Whaley to the stage, who is the Director of Education and Community Engagement for the Museum of the American Revolution.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing today? Good afternoon. Everybody who is joining us online, welcome. We are so grateful to have you here. As you heard, my name is Adrienne Whaley. I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement here at the Museum of the American Revolution. And on behalf of our President and CEO, Dr. Scott Stevenson, our board, and all of our staff, I would like to welcome you all here today, and thank you so much for joining us. The mission of our museum is to uncover and share compelling stories about the diverse people and the complex events that sparked America's ongoing experiment in liberty, equality, and self-government. And we see this partnership with the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust as a really important way for us to lean into particularly that idea that the American Revolution is ongoing, and that everybody who joins us here, whether you're here for this program, whether you explore our galleries, go on one of our outdoor walking tours, whatever it is, that you are a part of this experiment, which means that we have the opportunity every day to evaluate how it's going and to make decisions about what we would like to do to ensure that the American nation endures. It's also really exciting for us to have this particular program with these two fantastic speakers that I will soon introduce you to, because it is 2025, and we are entering the moment of the semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the creation of the American nation as we know it today. So we see this conversation as a fantastic way to enter into that moment, and to, particularly for this institution, bring us into what we think is going to be a really exciting exhibition that's going to open in October of this year called The Declaration's Journey, which is going to look at how, after the Declaration of Independence is written, people both at home and abroad use it for both rights as well as sovereignty movements. We think it's going to be really interesting, and we invite you all to come back for that. But in the meantime, I want you to know we have an exhibit opening up this April the 19th, called Banners of Liberty, where we're going to bring together around half of the still known to exist flags and banners from the American side of the Revolutionary War, all together in one place for perhaps the first time that they have all ever been together. That's going to run from April to August, and it's called Banners of Liberty, so please come check it out. And if you'd like to just explore the museum as it is today, we invite you to go on a highlights tour of our core galleries with some of our visitor engagement associates who are going to join us at the end of this program. Now, if you are online, don't worry, because we also have a virtual museum tour, so you can feel free to check out our galleries online as well. Now, I'm going to come back as your moderator, so I'm going to stop talking right now, but welcome. Thank you all so much for being here.
Okay, thank you, Adrienne. Bear with me as I have a couple of announcements to make. Inside of your form folders, you'll find a survey. We'd appreciate if you would complete the survey at the conclusion of today's forum and place it on your tables before you leave. If you're watching virtually, you will receive an email with this information at the conclusion. Secondly, each year we announce a video contest offered to any student, once again, offered to any student, whether attending in college or high school, who is attending today's forum in person or virtually. Students who plan to participate in the video contest will find the guidelines in the forum folder. Please read them carefully. I had one of my students come up here and just ask me a whole bunch of questions about it. I said, hold on and be patient. Those of you who have joined us virtually will find those same guidelines by visiting our web address at thedennisfarm.org. We will announce the first, second, and third place winners shortly following the February 8th deadline to submit. The third place finalists will receive a $100 cash award. Second place, $150. And third place, a whopping $250. I'm ready to re-enroll in college right about now. So I encourage you to pay close attention, take notes, and be engaged. Now, what we typically do each year in the spirit of fostering racial understanding, sometimes we find in diverse gatherings such as this a reluctance to approach one another. So I ask each of you to stand, take a few minutes to say hello, introduce yourselves to somebody you do not know. And if you're joining us virtually, we ask that you give a shout out in the chat, let us know your name and where you're from. We will take about 3 to 4 minutes tops, and then we will resume with the program. Okay? Thank you. Okay, can we begin to take our seats now? Can we please head back to our seats? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So it was just brought to my attention that part of our virtual audience that we have visitors that are watching now from Dayton, Ohio. I think I know some of them, as my wife spent some time living there. Paris, France, and also Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So welcome to our virtual audience. Thank you for attending. Now, since some of you aren't familiar with the Dennis Farm and what we do as the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust, we have a short video to share. It will highlight some of the history of the farm, recent events that have been held, and what the future holds. So at this time, welcome to the Dennis Farm.
When I think of land that I love, I think of America, land that I love. But I also think of a very specific place, the Dennis Farm. My name is Denise Dennis, and I am president of the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. But more importantly, I'm a direct descendant of people who settled the Dennis Farm. My ancestors, free African Americans, came to Northeast Pennsylvania from New England in 1793, purchased land, and carved a farm out of the wilderness. And they did this at a time when only 10% of African Americans were free people.
As part of
This land has remained in the hands of an African American family from the time that George Washington was president of this country, and has stayed in our family's hands ever since. My name is Darrell Gore. I am a 7th generation direct descendant of Prince Perkins. Prince was an African American Revolutionary War veteran. He used the money that he earned fighting in the Revolutionary War to purchase land.
Hello, my name is Lonnie Moore, and I'm a 7th generation direct descendant of Prince and Judith Perkins. In 2001, the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust was founded by the CEO, Denise Dennis, and my great aunt Hope to protect and preserve the natural resources of the land. We want to turn this into an educational resource for students and scholars and others that are interested in this type of rare history. Couldn't really understand it as a youngster, but as I grew older and understood the history of the farm and how significant the role the family was to the community here at large, and really what it means to just everybody in general. I mean, there hasn't been much history that speaks about free African Americans dating back as far as 1793. It really shows about how the country was developed. And to now be standing on a piece of land that was my ancestors is just, it's awesome. I mean, at the top we have a cemetery where our ancestors are even buried.
This is the cemetery on the Dennis Farm. All of our early ancestors are buried in this spot, but there are also others who are friends of the family who are buried in this cemetery. We're aware that there's at least 20 to 30, maybe even more interments in this property of African Americans. We believe a lot of these African Americans came during their journey from the South on the Underground Railroad. They ended up settling here, or they ended up dying here. But all of our ancestors, Prince Perkins, Henry Dennis, James Dennis, Angeline, Judith Perkins, are buried in this cemetery. This is kind of our most sacred site. For myself, Lonnie, and my sister Denise, this is where we know that we're with family. Without these people, I would not be.
my new friend, Denise, started to tell me the story of this farm. the American dream was realized through her ancestors' story and realized by free African Americans at a time when that was anything but common. To tell this story, to highlight the grit that Denise and her family's ancestors had against such great odds, there was no question that this was the place that the first semi-quincentennial bell must be placed. I'm honored to be able to stand here today and look behind us and see that grand, permanent semi-quincentennial bell, a bell that will in fact lock the Perkins-Dennis family story and highlight the contributions to this Commonwealth of Pennsylvania permanently into history.
Today, by honoring the Dennis Farm with this glorious bell, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the nation's keystone state, affirms that, in spite of the challenges confronting us today, we are still becoming a more perfect union.
Thank you, thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for today's panel discussion. Excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to have a slight adjustment. Before we go that far, let's have, it's my pleasure to introduce to you, the chairwoman and CEO and co-founder of the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. I'm trying to move this program along quickly. You'll quickly realize her passion for history and contributions of African Americans, both the told stories and the untold stories. She also has an amazing passion for our family's history and has been the driving force for the preservation of the trust since she co-founded it in 2001. We are first cousins and I have had the great fortune of knowing her all of my life. And now it is my honor to introduce her to you at this time, Miss Denise Dennis.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm going to embarrass him. I was also his first babysitter. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Lon, for your thoughtful but almost forgotten introduction. Thank you to our friends at the Museum of the American Revolution for partnering with us again this year and for your ongoing commitment to telling a more complete story of our nation's fight for independence. I'd also like to thank our board members present, Wade Katz and Patty Jepson. Will you raise your hands? I know Lon introduced you before, but we couldn't have done anything without the two of you, and you know I appreciate you. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our advisory board member, George Stark. George Stark has been an invaluable part of our team for the past 12 years. He retired from his long career with Coterra Energy, effective yesterday. But he assured me, after I gasped, he assured me that he has not retired from his work for and with the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. George, thank you and congratulations. We have a little gift for you. Darryl will take it over. And I'd also like to thank I just have the greatest team. We have the greatest team. We have the greatest team. So I'd like to thank our photographer, Al Four, who not only takes photos of our events, but has also photographed all of our archives and papers, including the artifacts we donated to the museum, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. So he's been working with us for a long time. I'd like to thank our I would like to thank our financial advisor, Dan Seiden, who keeps us afloat and has just become a great friend, and his lovely wife, Adrienne, both here. And of course, Phil Condren and his lovely wife. Phil handles all of our PR and printed material. So thank you, Phil. And Phil is also, dare I say, well, so is Dan, fellow Eagles fans. Go Birds. And then I'd like to publicly thank two people I thank a lot. A lot. I call them my guys, Lonnie and Daryl. They are the greatest. And no matter when, they always answer the call. No matter what hour of the day or night, I reach out to them. So thank you, guys. I just wanted to thank you in public. Next year, 2026, the United States will celebrate our 250th birthday. As we approach this momentous anniversary, we thought it would be a good time to revisit the Declaration of Independence and explore how, even though it fell short in a number of ways, the rights articulated in that singular document have enabled even those who were overlooked or omitted in 1776 to secure their rights over the past 250 years. The painting on the screen by artist Eileen Koppelman is of our 4 times great-grandfather, Prince Perkins, whom you heard about in the video. According to the history of Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, published in 1873, Prince Perkins was renowned as a fiddler and was paid 11 shillings, 3 pence for playing the fiddle at his community celebration of the nation's 24th birthday on July 4th, 1800. To me, this painting represents both the promise and the contradictions inherent in the Declaration of Independence. In 1800, although Prince Perkins was a free landowner, 90% of African Americans were enslaved people. Yet, he celebrated the nation's anniversary, his and his family's freedom, and the principles, the aspirations for which the Declaration of Independence stood. Ultimately, the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution are both aspirational documents. It is we, the people, who determine whether or not the aspirations articulated in our founding documents hold true. In 1776, the world had never before experienced such a government. Even the ancient Greek democracy and the Roman Republic supported slavery and an entrenched caste system, and monarchies were flourishing worldwide. The Declaration of Independence was revolutionary as a government created of the people, by the people, and for the people. Every Memorial Day, Flag Day, July 4th, Labor Day, and Veterans Day, which he still called Armistice Day, Norman Dennis, the great-great-grandson of Prince Perkins, displayed the American flag on the front porch, full force, as the flags are displayed in the painting. Norman Dennis taught me our family history parallel with American history because our family history was American history. He was born in 1898 in Northeast Pennsylvania during a time when it was not easy to be an African American man in this country. It has never been easy. And he served in the segregated Navy in World War I. Yet, he was the most patriotic person and a lifelong student of history that I knew. He believed in the Declaration of Independence. He believed in the promise, even though that promise didn't always hold true for men like him. Prince Perkins played his fiddle that July 4th, 1800, 18 years before the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass was born. In 1852, when Douglass was asked to speak at a July 4th celebration, he wrote an essay, now famous, that asked, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" Yet even as he asked that provocative question, he expressed his belief in the United States, writing, "While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is also cheered by the tendencies of the age." Because in 1852, the anti-slavery movement was already well underway. As we all know, Douglass lived long enough to see slavery abolished and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed. Unfortunately, he also lived long enough to witness the backlash, the fierce backlash against this true equality. He lived to see the venal spread of Jim Crow like a disease that continued to infect the nation until the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Act were passed. In 1894, in what was his last public speech, Douglass acknowledged that he could no longer fight as he once did. "Time and strength," he said, "are not equal to the task before me." I sometimes feel like that myself. I wish I had more time. I wish I were younger. I'd be ready to fight. Anyway, at the same time, he reaffirmed his faith in America's ideals, telling his listeners at Washington's AME Church, quote, "Could I be heard by this great nation, I would call to mind the sublime and glorious truths by which, at its birth, it saluted a listening world. Its voice was the trumpet of an archangel, summoning time-honored tyranny to judgment. Crowned heads heard it and shrieked. It announced the advent of a nation based on human brotherhood and the self-evident truths of liberty and equality. Its mission was a redemption of the world from the bondage of ages." Douglass continued with a lesson for us today. Apply these sublime and glorious truths to the situation now before you. Put away race prejudice. Banish the idea that one class must rule over another. Recognize that the rights of the humblest citizen are as worthy of protection as are those of the highest. And then your republic will stand and flourish. Now I'd like to show you ta-da! Now I'd like to show you two books I've written recently. One was published last year, and the other one will be out in the spring. The first book, these are books about men who were in the American Revolution who are also members of our family. The first book, Bristol Bud Sampson, Patriot of the American Revolution, is about an ancestor of ours. He married Prince Perkins' daughter, Phoebe, and he is buried on the farm. In 1818, they made pensions available to Revolutionary War vets, and because he was blind, he petitioned for his pension and had to make an arduous journey in order to get affidavits confirming that he did serve, and he did. He walked from Pennsylvania to Connecticut to get affidavits from his commanding officer in New Canaan, Connecticut. The books are for young people. They're written in rhyming verse because it is young people who need to know these stories, the beginning of their lives, to get a true picture of all the Americans who contributed to our independence. The second book, Abel Benson, Patriot of the American Revolution, the artist for that book, Eric Battle, is here today. Do you want to raise your hand, Eric? The illustrator. And it too is in rhyming verse. Abel Benson, you've all heard of Paul Revere? Abel was the Black Paul Revere. On April 19, 1775, he was still a boy, but he could ride a horse and he was a talented trumpet player. He was one of the relay riders in Middlesex County, Massachusetts, who alerted the settlers that the king's regulars were coming. No one said the British are coming because they were all British. What they said is the king's regulars are out. He had a route from Natick to Needham or Needham to Natick, Massachusetts. I always get it mixed up. And then later, he joined when he was a teenager. He actually joined the Revolutionary War Army. He served through the war, and he too received a pension. And his gravesite is in Framingham, Massachusetts, and it says, Abel Benson, Rev. War. I wrote these books for children because the earlier you learn the truth, the better you are, the better equipped you are to operate in the world. So the second one will be available in April. It's the designers doing the layout. And this one, I believe, is still in the bookstore downstairs. With that, I leave you. I always say, I hope you leave our forum today as ambassadors for fostering racial understanding across all of the things that seek to divide us. This is not a passive enterprise for you attendees here or away from here. This is our charge to be ambassadors for, to quote Spike Lee, ambassadors for doing the right thing. With that, enjoy the panel today. I am thrilled and want to thank our distinguished speakers for this panel. We are honored to have both Martha Jones and Jeffrey Rosen with us today. I'm certain they will inspire you.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Another round of applause for Miss Denise Dennis. I see that we've had a few extra people who have joined the discussion for today. I'd like to first acknowledge my son. You heard me mention his name before, Lonnie Moore the fourth. He is sitting here with us. Lonnie, stand up and just wave to everybody, please. He is a 8th generation direct descendant to this family. And then I see a couple of others. My friend Kevin Cook is some areas. My fraternity brother Kevin Cook and his daughter Sage Cook. So thank you. Another student who is here today. Are you ready? Are you ready? Okay, Adrienne, G. Whaley. She is an educator. I know you've met her previously for a brief moment to hear her opening welcome, but I want to tell you a little bit more about her. In addition to being an educator and a history lover who currently serves as the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Museum of American Revolution, Adrienne earned her bachelor's degree in African American Studies from Harvard University and her master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. She has worked in both art and history museums, including the Museum of Modern Art, New York, the African Museum in Philadelphia, and the Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum. Adrienne loves the potential for objects, artifacts, and primary source documents to enrich student learning experiences. She carries her love of history and uncovering the stories of common people into her spare time as an avid genealogist, researching her own family history, and as a former programming chair and president of the Philadelphia's African American Genealogy Group. My mother was part of that group as well. As part of the museum educator and as a genealogist, she has presented on television and in workshops and conferences, both locally and nationally. Please welcome Adrienne.
That was a lot, but I promise you all, I'm actually not going to talk that much. My role here this afternoon is to serve as the moderator for what I hope is going to be a really interesting, really healthy conversation between Jeffrey Rosen and Martha S. Jones. Now, the purpose of this conversation every year is to think about how each of us can be fostering racial understanding out in the world. But the specific theme and topic changes every year. So as you all know, the focus this year is on the Declaration of Independence and equality. That's what we're really going to focus in on today. So what's going to happen is that each of our speakers is going to present for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to invite them back up to the stage so that we can have a conversation. I will ask a couple of starting questions, but then I'm going to turn it over to you all, both here on site as well as those of you who are joining us online. So as you all are listening, please be thinking about what your questions are, given this opportunity to not just chat with our presenters, but also with each other. What is it that you want to accomplish here? What can you accomplish here? How can you make sure that you leave this space that we are creating together feeling inspired and motivated and ready to take action out into the world? How does that sound? Sounds good? All right, fantastic. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Jeffrey Rosen. Now, if you're from Philadelphia, then you will know that Jeff is our very close neighbor because he's actually the president and CEO of the National Constitution Center, like up the street and around the corner. When he is not directly on the floor chatting with people and making sure that things are running smoothly, he is also the host of the We the People weekly podcast of constitutional debate. He's also a professor of law at the George Washington University Law School, as well as a contributing editor of The Atlantic. He was previously the legal affairs editor of The New Republic and a staff writer for The New Yorker. Jeff's new book, which I have on my Kindle and have read, is The Pursuit of Happiness, and I'd love to dig into this, how classical writers on virtue inspired the lives of the founders and defined America. His other books include the New York Times bestseller Conversations with RBG, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on life, love, liberty, and law, as well as biographies of Louis Brandeis and William Howard Taft. Jeff is a graduate of Harvard College, go Harvard, Oxford University, where he was a Marshall Scholar, and Yale Law School, which I will forgive you for. He also recently was named in 2024 by the French government a Chevalier of the Order of Arts and Letters. Pretty cool. So let's invite Jeff Rosen up to the stage.
Thank you so much. And hello, friends. It is an honor to be here with you to talk about the Declaration of Independence and equality. As Denise Dennis said so eloquently, the Declaration throughout American history has provided an inspiration that's allowed excluded people to make a claim for their unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What I want to do in my time with you is to share the central moments in American history when African Americans have invoked the Declaration to make its promises real. The National Constitution Center is about to create an amazing interactive declaration, and we're bringing together great scholars, including Danielle Allen on equality, Robbie George on liberty, and Gordon Wood on government by consent. Akil Amar is going to annotate the entire declaration, and we've got a great panel of historians that will select the key moments when African Americans and others have invoked the Declaration throughout history. So what I'm going to try to do is give you the highlights as best I can. So here we go. The central dilemma, the central hypocrisy of the founding was the incompatibility of slavery with the Declaration. How is it possible that Jefferson and the other founders, who insisted that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights, could tolerate the existence of slavery? What's so striking about the founding generation is that that generation of enslavers did not attempt to justify that hypocrisy. In fact, in their moments of candor, they recognized it. There's an amazing moment when Patrick Henry has just given the "Give me liberty and give me death" speech in Virginia. And then he says, "Is it not amazing that I myself, who believe that slavery violates the Bible and natural law, myself own slaves? I won't justify it. I will not attempt to. It's simple avarice or greed. I can't do with the inconvenience of living without it." And that was the nub of the matter. They knew it was wrong and wicked and violated the Declaration and the Bible and natural law, but liked the lifestyle and didn't want to give it up. And in his moments of candor, even Jefferson acknowledged that hypocrisy. What was so striking about the Declaration, though, is that from the very beginning, it provided a shining pole star of liberty that allowed African Americans to call out the founders for having betrayed their own ideals and insist on their right to claim their unalienable rights. In 1777, Prince Hall delivered a petition to the Massachusetts legislature insisting that slavery violated the natural rights recognized in the Declaration of Independence. Although his petition was not acted on, just a few years later, Mum Bet, later known as Elizabeth Freeman, also petitioned the Massachusetts courts for her freedom, invoking the section of the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780 that said all men are born free and equal. Her suit succeeded and provided the basis for the Massachusetts Supreme Court in 1783 to find that slavery violated the Massachusetts Constitution. And that central precedent shows that when courts and citizens took seriously the claims of natural rights, they recognized that it was incompatible with slavery. The next generation of Black heroes also invoked the Declaration to rebuke the hypocrisy of slavery. In 1829, David Walker, in his famous appeal, insisted of the incompatibility of slavery with the ideals of the Declaration and called on the founders to make them real. And then there's the great example of John Quincy Adams, one of the great heroes of American history. He was not initially a fervent abolitionist, but then he had two tragedies that befell him. First, he lost the election for president in 1828. He failed of re-election. The same year, his oldest son, George Washington Adams, committed suicide. He couldn't take the pressure of the name George Washington Adams and the expectations his fathers had pressed on him, and he jumped off a steamship. Adams had a year examining his soul. He read Cicero and the Bible, and based on his close reading of the Bible and of the Declaration of Independence, he concluded that slavery violated both the injunction of Jesus to free the captives and also the natural rights in the Declaration of Independence. And he transformed himself into what Frederick Douglass called was the greatest white abolitionist of his age. He introduced a constitutional amendment to end slavery. He denounced the gag rule, which forbade the reading of anti-slavery petitions in Congress. He voted against the Mexican War, and then he died on the floor of the House of Representatives. His last whispered words were, "I am composed," that stoic injunction to achieve self-mastery and virtue. It's an incredible story, and it was all animated by his devotion to the Bible and the Declaration. And then there's the great Frederick Douglass, who Denise Dennis mentioned. What was the moment when Douglass felt most enslaved? It was the moment his wicked master forbade him from learning how to read. And when faced with an attempt to shackle his mind, Douglass went onto the streets of Baltimore. He bought reading lessons with bread. He paid boys to teach him how to read. Then with bread, he bought this golden book, The Columbian Orator. And in this book, he read excerpts from Cicero, from Benjamin Franklin, from the Declaration of Independence, and a dialogue on slavery where a slave argued for his freedom. This convinced him to become the greatest abolitionist of his time, and he transformed himself into that astonishing voice for freedom. As Denise Dennis said, he denounced slavery in his "What to a Slave is the 4th of July" speech in 1852. Friends, I was just noticing, I'm sitting right there, look at the date shining behind us on that building. It's 1854. What happened in 1854? Those words that are shimmering through the window, that was the infamous Kansas-Nebraska Act, which repeals the Missouri Compromise and allows each new state to decide for itself whether or not to admit slavery. Bleeding Kansas ignites the fissure that leads to the infamous Dred Scott decision in 1857, just 3 years after that date that's behind us. And in Dred Scott, Chief Justice Taney says that Black people have no rights which white people are bound to respect, and attempts to exclude them from the claims of the Declaration of Independence. In his dissenting opinion, Benjamin Curtis rebukes Taney for his inaccurate history and notes that 5 states at the time of the founding recognized the rights of free African Americans and insists that African Americans were just as entitled to the claims of the Declaration as their fellow citizens. And it was that Dred Scott decision that inspired a young Abraham Lincoln to go back to the debates over the founding. And in the Illinois Law Library, he concluded that it was a libel on the founders to claim that the Constitution was a pro-slavery document because, in fact, most of the men who voted for it opposed slavery. Frederick Douglass reached the same conclusion. When he read Madison's notes published in 1840, he concluded too that it was a libel on the founders to say it was a pro-slavery document and that it was a glorious liberty document. And based on their reading of the notes of the convention and their devotion to the Declaration, both Lincoln and Douglass insisted that slavery was inconsistent with the Declaration. And then Lincoln stands in 1861 in front of Independence Hall, we can just imagine it right over there, and says on his way to his inauguration, "I would rather be assassinated on this spot than abandon the ideals of the Declaration." And he says that he's never had a thought politically that didn't stem from the Declaration of Independence, and resolves to inscribe its promise into the Constitution. And then the war came, as Lincoln said, and Lincoln is martyred. He's shot by John Wilkes Booth because Booth heard him endorsing Black voting rights. It was at that moment when Booth heard Lincoln's endorsement that he resolved to kill him, and Lincoln is martyred. And his death is followed by the Reconstruction Amendments to the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which overturn the Dred Scott decision, abolish slavery, promise equality, and ultimately guarantee Black male voting rights. John Bingham, who introduces the 14th Amendment, is inspired by the Declaration and also by his reading of John Marshall's decisions recognizing broad congressional power to protect equality. And his goal in the 14th Amendment is to ensure that the states, as well as the federal government, must respect the basic privileges or immunities of citizenship. Congress tries to make real the promises of the Declaration with the Civil Rights Act of 1875, but in a wicked and historically ignorant decision, the Supreme Court strikes down the Civil Rights Act. And in the notorious civil rights cases by Justice Joseph Bradley, whose devotion to preserving states' rights and slavery outstretches his devotion to broad federal power, the court strikes it down. It takes nearly another 100 years for the promises of the Civil Rights Act to be resurrected, and that story, which involves heroes like Thurgood Marshall arguing for the unconstitutionality of school segregation and the many African-American men and women who Martha Jones has done more than any other historian to tell their stories, and we're all going to learn so much from her. The court strikes down school segregation, and then we have King on the Mall, Dr. King, once again invoking the Declaration and promising that it's a glorious promissory note whose promises must be made real. All right, I did it as best I could. Those are the highlights from the founding to 1964. I've got to close, and we're going to learn from Martha Jones right now, but it's so important to learn about this history and learn about the ideals of the Constitution and the Declaration. There's this amazing moment with John Quincy Adams, 1839. It's the Jubilee of the Constitution, the 50th anniversary of Washington's inauguration. And Civil War is coming, and it looks like the Union's going to break apart over slavery. And Quincy Adams says the only thing that's going to save us is learning about the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. And then he quotes the book of Deuteronomy, and he says, make these principles of the Declaration and the Constitution as frontlets between your eyes, bind them to your hands and your arms, put them upon your doorposts and whisper them to your children before they sleep, make them the principles of your political salvation. And that's just what we've got to do in these polarized times when the country looks at times like there's so little that binds us. It's these glorious principles of the Declaration and the Constitution are going to keep us together. And I know that's just what we're going to do together. Thank you so much.
I feel like I need to catch my breath. That was very impressive and very comprehensive. And I know that I feel like a level setting has been accomplished here that has been very useful. Yeah, see, that's right. We're having community engagement right now. This is a conversation, so thank you. Yes. So now I would like to welcome up our second speaker, Dr. Martha S. Jones. Now, Dr. Jones is the Society of Black Alumni Presidential Professor, Professor of History, and a professor at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Agora Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. She's a legal and cultural historian whose research explores how Black people have shaped the story of American democracy, and today extends to work on memorial landscapes and family memoir. She also directs the Hard Histories at Hopkins Project, which since 2020 has examined the role of slavery and racism at the Johns Hopkins University and Hospital. She's also the author of multiple books, including the award-winning Vanguard, How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on on Equality for All, which I have sitting at my desk right now and have read, and Birthright Citizens, A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America. And she also shares her work as a public historian, writing, speaking, and/or consulting for outlets including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, Politico, USA Today, PBS, Monument Lab, Netflix, and the Southern Poverty Law Center. She also, and I'm very excited about this as a genealogist, has a new book coming out soon called The Trouble of Color, an American Family Memoir. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Come on up.
Well, good afternoon. Y'all should know this is not the first time I have followed Jeff Rosen at the podium, So I knew what was coming. And it's an extraordinary honor to be here for the Lonaé Moore Forum. I want to thank Ms. Denise Dennis and the entire Dennis Farm family. So many of you gathered here as you do every year. It's really an honor to be with you. Thanks to Adrienne and our friends at the museum. I'm looking forward to wandering through the galleries when we finish this afternoon. I think it's no surprise that all three of us looked to invoke the great Frederick Douglass. Douglass is there for you. I practice yoga. It's like child's pose. You know, anytime you need it, Douglass is there for you, which is to say, he is brilliant. He is prolific. He lives through so many of the defining moments in our early history as a nation, both as an enslaved person, but of course as an abolitionist, as a statesman, and a great deal more. So I'm going to take my turn with Douglass, and I want to come back to the 1852 moment in which Douglass delivers his much remembered speech, "What to the slave is the 4th of July." I think it's a moment, yes, where Douglass continues to be inspired and moved by the ideals of the Declaration. And at the same time, he is profoundly despairing. Right? By 1852, some of the great promise of the abolitionist movement has been thwarted. As Jeff Rosen points out, we are by 1852 as a nation, while not everyone knows it, right, on the way to civil war. The southern states are exerting their influence, the possibilities for freedom, for autonomy, for the lives of even free African Americans are closing in, certainly in the life of Douglass, but in the communities that he is so much a part of. So I want to read just a small bit from this speech that I think will be a point of reflection for us. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Douglass, I think, reaches for the Declaration in this moment in a powerful gesture in which he looks to separate the text, its principles and its ideals, from the very men who had composed it and from those who continued to thwart those ideals, even in Douglass's own time. Political theorist Danielle Allen, who Jeff Rosen mentions, urges us to go back to the Declaration again and again, as Douglass did, to understand our ideals, even as we may not hold up the men who put them pen to paper. Alan's message to us is about a slow reading of that document. And I'm sure Douglass was just that kind of student. Douglass was someone who treasured the word, right? Had, as we heard, struggled mightily to have access to the word, no less command of it. And he respected the text enough so that, as Denise told us, that text remains an inspiration, even as he sees it betrayed in his own moment. Some years ago, I was asked to write an essay about the American Revolution. And my first response was, this is not really my subject. But the editors were persistent and said, you can write about anything you'd like. And my subject was Elizabeth Freeman. Because I think Freeman's example, as Jeff Rosen has shared with us, an enslaved woman in Western Massachusetts who works in a household where revolutionary ideas, including those ideals about life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness that are memorialized in the Declaration, are being invented, are being inserted into law, are coming into being. And one of the things we know about enslaved people is how, deprived of the word, deprived of access to a seat at the table in the parlor there in Western Massachusetts, they listened. They listened in. They shared what they heard and what they learned. And Elizabeth Freeman hears those words that come to be enshrined in the Constitution of the state of Massachusetts. And I hope you hear the echoes of the Declaration. All men are born free and equal and have certain natural, essential and unalienable rights, among which may be reckoned the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberties, that of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, in fine, that of seeking and obtaining their safety and happiness. Elizabeth Freeman hears those words. And frankly, I think she's thinking less about the dilemmas that the founders faced as they looked to Great Britain as their oppressor. And she is thinking about her own circumstance there in Western Massachusetts. And we know that she, along with a man named Brom, will seek out an attorney who sees things enough their way that he's willing to not only bring suit, but to argue that the Massachusetts state constitution, by virtue of these words, has drawn slavery is outside the bounds of law, outside the bounds of the Constitution. And they succeed. One of the details I love about Freeman's story is that they succeed before a jury, not before a judge. That these are ideas that are being wrestled with, not only by elite legal thinkers or highly placed individual men, right, but jurors, ordinary people there in Western Massachusetts who also already are being called on to weigh the possibilities and the contradictions of the Declaration in the lives of enslaved people. Jeff Rosen mentioned, and bigger than life, I think a lot about the ways in which the experiences, the ideas, the dilemmas that African American women face tell us a great deal about our history. And Elizabeth Freeman is one of those, which is to say, I have to think that she's the kind of figure, right, that fueled Douglas's hope, right, even in the 1850s, that there was something for him, something for us in the Declaration, even in the most despairing of times. But I don't want us to leave today without remembering how uneven and how troubled an era this was. So I'll leave us with one more story. And that is about another of our founders, John Jay, who you may know, certainly my young people know from their study of history, that Jay is among the Americans, the new Americans, who is charged with negotiating the end of the American Revolution, and in Paris, France, along with Benjamin Franklin and others, is charged with negotiating a treaty that will bring the conflict to a formal end. Jay travels with his family from New York, including his wife, a nephew, and an enslaved woman named Abigail. Abigail travels with the Jays, first by way of the Caribbean. Jay is first posted in Spain, and finally they settle in Paris, where Jay shuttles between Paris and London on his diplomatic mission. But Mrs. Jay sets up housekeeping in Paris with the great assistance of Abigail, who not only oversees the household with other servants, but tends to Mrs. Jay's young children. Abigail, too, is contaminated by those ideals of liberty, even far away in Paris. And she meets people in that city who encourage and further fuel her idea that perhaps there is more for her. Perhaps there is a way in this world that has turned on those powerful terms in the Declaration. Perhaps there is too a way for her. Abigail leaves the Jays' household without notice and without permission. Everyone knows that she has been unhappy. Some people think she's got a toothache. Maybe not. Some people think she's homesick for New York. Probably. But what everyone knows is that Abigail now herself is irresistibly moved by the prospect of liberty. She is in very short order arrested, detained in a Paris jail by local officials, and only after much negotiation, cajoling, and otherwise, brokered by both Jay's nephew, Peter J. Monroe, and Benjamin Franklin, only after much negotiation, Abigail returns to the Jays' household, which she does, but by this time she is ill, gravely so. And in Mrs. Jay's letters to her husband, who's in London, we learn that Abigail will die shortly after she returns to the Jays' home. Never to know her liberty, never to fully step into that revolutionary moment as had someone like Elizabeth Freeman. Abigail's story is a difficult one to tell, but I think it's an important one because it takes me back to Douglas, who I think is a man who feels the weight of that history, of those lives. Some of them find possibility in the Declaration, and some of them who live the profound disappointments of the Declaration. I think Douglas lives with, and carries with him the weight of those two histories, these two women, Elizabeth Freeman and Abigail. I want to end by suggesting that perhaps, not unlike Douglas's time, in our own time, the Declaration will continue to be that document to which we return to understand our best ideals, the principles, and more that we aspire to, that we honor, that we struggle and fight to realize. And we will do so in the face of some moments in which, like Elizabeth Freeman, we prevail. Freeman lives a long life. She has her own family. She becomes a property owner in Western Massachusetts. She leaves a will full of philanthropic gifts to her community. It's an incredible story. But there's also the story of Abigail, left outside, beyond the reach of the Declaration in that very same moment. And I think our charge, as Danielle Allen has urged us, is to go back to this document, to do that slow read, to wring from it. Sure, the history and the contradictions, but to wring from it the principles that we intend to hold up, to honor, to remember that history, and to use the document to craft, to forge, to struggle around our next future. So with that, I'll stop and I'll say thank you all very much.
Jeff, I'm going to invite you back up. Come join us on the stage. Martha, thank you so much. I feel like you did a very effective job of rooting us in sort of the emotional notes of this history. Thank you. So we are going to transition into our conversation. Give us just a moment.
Thank you, sir.
Hope we have friends who are joining us online. You all have been putting some things into the chat, so we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. We call our program to a close. I would like to start with what sounds like a simple question, but is, I recognize as a person who works in museum education, a quite challenging question. You all have both rooted us, I think, really well in a history of the Declaration of Independence as an inspirational document, an aspirational document. And we want people to go back to it and read it. And we want people to understand the histories that you all shared. But we live in a world where not everybody wants to come to a museum or attend a forum or read a history book or listen to a podcast. So as we think about concrete things that we can do, what is one recommendation for how we can get these stories, I know, in front of people who might not have access to this sort of an experience, or who might be resistant to learning these stories? I'm just gonna dive right in, y'all. Sorry.
No one can resist a good story. We just saw that from Martha Jones, how riveting it was to hear the stories of Abigail and Elizabeth Freeman. And we will all remember them. And I want to learn more. I didn't know about the story of Abigail. I'm now going to learn about John Jay. And it just encourages further reading and learning. And my experience at the Constitution Center is that spreading stories across the land and meeting people where they are, you'll always draw new people in. And people find their stories in different places and different venues, on podcasts, at a museum, in classes. in churches and in communities across America. I have to share an amazing experience I had 2 days ago. I was at Brigham Young University talking to 5,000 students at their weekly devotional. And just before I started talking about the pursuit of happiness, the dean said, we were talking about the virtues that inspired the founders and Ben Franklin. He said, if you ask these students to recite the 10 virtues that they recite as part of their mission oaths, they'll be able to do it from memory. So I just told the group, I'm told that you can recite this from memory. Would you do me that honor? 5,000 people stood up and recited in scores of different languages because that's the way they take their oaths, these 10 virtues. And the feeling was just electric. And I share that to say, I'm just blown away wherever I travel in America by how hungry people are for stories about the American idea, how people of completely different backgrounds resonate to those stories. And although we don't agree about the meaning of these principles, we are indeed united as one people, as civic friends by our devotion to the principles themselves. So I'm optimistic, and when we have great storytellers like Martha and like the people at the Museum of the American Revolution, I know that we're going to inspire a lot of people.
Thank you.
Sometimes I have students who are reluctantly taking a history course. I don't know, maybe it fit the schedule or something, or it was a requirement. And so I asked them, what's been their experience? And frequently what they will say is, well, I took history in high school and it was just dates and names and it was pretty dull. So part of my job, right, is to push back and to challenge and to convert folks to other ways of encountering the past. That's one. And storytelling is so important to that, I think. Two, I think we have to, in some sense, be willing to tell the stories that people need to hear, need to know, need to learn. Which is to say, I might be fascinated by, as I am, the story of Elizabeth Freeman, but I have to allow for the possibility that there are other kinds of stories, other kinds of histories, other kinds of characters. And that's part of my job too, is to appreciate the histories you want to learn and to encourage you, especially young people, if somebody's not writing the history you need to read, then you need to become a historian. You don't need to read history, you need to write history and to write that. The last thing is, I think, sometimes we have to come out of the brick and mortar spaces, right? And really, is just describing, be somewhat evangelical about what we do, and showing up. I was trained by a historian who, for a time, was like the voice of history in Disney World. Well, people thought that was just ridiculous. But he said, no, people come to Disney World. And if they're going to come to Disney World and they're going to talk history, I'm going to be the one, right? Because I have things I want to say. And so, these are wonderful to me, sacred spaces, spaces like this museum, like the National Constitution Center. But I have to recognize that there are folks who are elsewhere, and I need to go there too. I've never been to Disney World, but maybe.
You should go to hear the voice of history there. So where would you all like to encounter these stories outside of spaces like museums and podcasts and things like that? I have many favorite programs here at the museum, but one of my favorites is a program called Revolution at the Library, where we take our family programs out into libraries for the Free Library of Philadelphia, as well as for the Camden County Library System. And for us, that's been a lovely way to encounter people who love those spaces as safe spaces, but might not necessarily see a museum as a place for themselves. But Jeff, you mentioned churches, I mean, hair salons, barbershops, like at the grocery store, like where else would we like to see these stories come up?
It's all and more. Uh, Another amazing experience in Elkhart, Indiana. I spoke to a church where 500 people had gathered at the invitation of a guy called Frank Martin, who started a club called the Owls Club for over 50 retirees. And they gathered in this church. We talked about the founders and the pursuit of happiness. And then they met at the church for 12 weeks, taking our Constitution 101 class for adult learners. And I zoomed in at the end. It was just electric to see the hunger for lifelong learning among retirees. We're going to take the Civic Toolkit in the fall to a series of rural bookstores. There are a series of really inspiring independent bookstores started in small rural communities and travel around there. Basically, I think we're all on an evangelical mission to tell these stories for America 250, to meet people where they are and to inspire people to create these circles of light and learning, and invite us to come out so that the Constitution Center and the Museum for the American Revolution can take the show on the road and tell stories across America.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. And at the same time, I think that part of my experience is that many folks are interested in history, kind of episodically. There's something in the headlines, there's something happening, maybe in your own hometown, maybe, across the continent, maybe somewhere else in the world. But people want bits of history because indeed it does help us make sense of what is happening around. How did we get here? And frankly, they don't want a textbook. They don't want to wander through 14 galleries, right? They want sort of, I don't know, the 2-minute, the 5-minute, the 15-minute version. And in this sense, for me, journalists become really important partners in that work, because it is the work of many of our wonderful journalists, including my friend Erin Haynes, who I understand was here for this forum a couple of years back, that these are folks who are taking what we develop, what we learn, what we research, what we distill, and really putting it in the world at the moment that folks most need it. And so part of my learning, right, has been how to have relationships and be accessible to folks who are just going to have a reach that I am not quite built for.
And then all of us can be partners together in sharing these stories. Yeah, absolutely. I forgot to tell you all in the audience, by the way, that sometimes you all will get to answer questions. So I'm curious, where else do you all want to encounter these stories? Or how have you been sharing these stories within your own circles of influence?
Oh, excuse me. What's that? Oh, wait.
I am just impressed because I just shared with this young lady right here how I learned history, and it was dates, places, names, and I couldn't keep it together. So I am impressed that you were able to keep that together. And when I went to high school, it was slavery. That's it. People was enslaved. It was like a cutoff. I think with me, as I've gotten older, storytelling has become very important to me because I hated history. I didn't want to have to remember. I didn't want to have to go back and take a test and remember all of that. But in storytelling, it clicks a part of the brain that you may not remember dates, but you can almost retell the story again. And just by sitting here, I want to thank everybody. I just want to thank you because I've learned more about Black history today than I learned when I was in high school. And that means a lot to me because I'm raising children, and I'm engaged with other kids, other young people who have absolutely no idea that these stories exist. I'm almost compelled to say, maybe you need to do, get together with, what's the game thing called? Xbox and do a, and do something with Xbox, because our young people are so engaged in certain things and they're at different levels. And what they pay attention to is important. What that audience would look like back when I went to school is totally different of what that audience is today. And I think trying to, like you were saying, meet people where they are is very important, because now our audiences are different lateral, different horizontal, different vertical. They're all over the place. And it's not going to be easy to try to put them in one place. But if we could just give them, like you were talking about, that one little excerpt of 5-minute, 10-minute of storytelling, and giving them that main person, or that it allows them to go and say, wait, I heard about Abigail. Let me go look it up. Google Abigail. You know, it gives them that motivation to learn more about that person. If you just give them a little bit, it sparks their curiosity. And I think that would help a lot.
I feel like we can just end this forum there. Like we just covered everything. But also Xbox, if you were listening, we are open for sponsorships for all three of us. I saw a hand in the back. Yes.
Let me say, I'm going to have a question, but I'm just going to answer the question, right?
Pull it closer, a little bit closer.
Yeah, answer the question. As a docent at the African American Museum, one thing I agree with is about storytelling. But as citizens of America, I think that the question is about communication and being historically grounded, wherever your personal, whether genealogy or the history of your locality or national history, to be able to ground our communication in that. Because if we start trying to continue to manufacturing, blocking out people in certain age groups, certain, places, we'll miss being able to be versatile in many different places amongst many different ages. When I'm at the museum, I noticed that it's interesting when little people come up and say, because I'm a jokester, like, you really serious? Or college students say, I get what you mean. Being versatile in our historical narrative as a part of our personal development. I think that's a requirement of us all. It's not something in delivering a message. It's about what do we understand about the historical, our own personal history, and where is it centered in the history of our location, our family, the nation itself. And what does that mean to you compared to what does that mean to me?
Thank you. Thank you for that. I see that there's another hand raised. And before we come over to you, do we have multiple hands? Let's see. Right over here. All right. Before we get to the both of your questions and comments, I'm going to pull in one from online. So someone is looking for, let's see what you all have to say, the best and truest online sources to point people towards when they have questions about history, about civics, and similar topics. I can guess a couple of ideas.
I'm going to, let me do this, Jeff.
Go for it.
And say, I send folks frequently and importantly and quickly to the National Constitution Center and your web installation, because what you all have done, you all not only make the text available, right, for folks who actually want to come back to the text, but you have worked with so many experts on creating guides and interpretive materials that lets us do the deeper dive into some of these documents and some of these stories. So you can pitch it now, but I wanted to tell you that is what I recommend.
You saved him from having to start that.
Thank you for pitching it so well and for sending your students to the interactive Constitution. It's the most amazing resource. This launched in 2015 and it's now gotten 100 million hits, and it's among the most Googled constitutions in the world, because when folks are Googling the Constitution in response to a news event, it comes up top and then they dig in deep. The core of it brought together top liberal and conservative historians and law professors to write about every clause of the Constitution, describing what they agree about and what they disagree about. So you Google the habeas corpus clause and you have Justice Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Katyal with 1,000 words about what they agree about, and then separate statements about what they disagree about. And multiply that by 80 clauses, 160 scholars. It's an incredibly deep and rich, and it models civil agreement and disagreement, which is the essence of constitutional deliberation. And then there are the podcasts, which also bring together liberals and conservatives, the Founders Library of Primary Source Documents, this great new Constitution 101 course that we've just launched with Khan Academy, which brings together, again, liberal and conservative scholars debating the Constitution. I feel like a Ginsu knife salesman, but there's more. But it's an incredible privilege to be part of this mission, and that's really what it is, to model thoughtful, deep discourse. So check out the Interactive Constitution.
Absolutely. Now, if there was one other thing, aside from also the Museum of the American Revolution, that you would point people towards, what's one other resource that you would recommend people look at for history and civics? While you all are thinking, I'll call out that Colonial Williamsburg is actually working on a really interesting project for teachers, for educators, that's called history.org. So they've actually owned that domain for a number of years, and they've decided to reactivate it with resources from a number of organizations, including ours, including the National Constitution Center, Mount Vernon, New York Historical Society, iCivics, lots of other institutions, where we are actually sharing objects from our collection so that teachers can build resources around them across a number of different topics and themes, and putting all of that freely available online. So that's another thing to check out for sure.
So I'm going to pitch one of my favorite things, and maybe this will connect for some of you, is that I'm a huge fan of C-SPAN and book TV. You know, so when Jeff's got a new book and I'm a little too busy to, crack the real book and get into it, I can learn so much, by 45 minutes, you in conversation with a smart interlocutor about what you're thinking. And it's so fresh, it's so cutting edge. It's rarely, though it is sometimes, it's rarely sort of staid academic, because folks are, they're at podiums, they're in panels like this. So it's more conversational. So I think C-SPAN, Book TV, and their whole suite of resources, you can listen in your ears. I use it when I'm doing the dishes, when I'm doing something dull, but it's a great way to, get that short bit of something that maybe later you'll do a deep dive on.
Yeah, I love that. How about you, Jeff? One more.
So all of the great institutions you mentioned are so important to visit. iCivics, the Bill of Rights Institute, the Museum for the American Revolution, Mount Vernon, Monticello, Colonial Williamsburg, and many of these great history and civic sites are being aggregated by an organization called More Perfect, which is going to have a home site for America's 250, and you can find links to all of them. In addition to all that, wasn't it moving and incredibly compelling to hear Martha Jones read the primary text? When she read from Frederick Douglass, I found myself writing down his words, hypocrisy and vanity, and it's just so urgently important to go back to the primary text so you can do it yourself. The most amazing thing about living today is that all of these primary texts are free and online, and there are sites like Founders Online that have the collected papers of people from the founding era. You can check out Abigail Adams, Mercy Otis Warren, Alexander Hamilton, plug in words that you want to search for, read the primary text, and make up your own mind.
Thank you for that. Let's see. We had two hands up for questions or comments.
I was really excited about the semi-quintennial coming this year. And then, the year went on, and then November happened and things seemed to change. And now in January, we see these changes. So the excitement I had to celebrate it next year is kind of dimmed a little bit. And I guess I'm looking for you guys to say, how do we stay engaged when we look at folks who are looking in the past as opposed to looking for the future? And what do we do to keep that excitement going, recognizing that there are processes in place to kind of take us back to where we used to be as opposed to looking forward?
This is probably a fantastic moment for me to just say that the Museum of the American Revolution and Dennis Farm are nonpartisan organizations, and that the views reflected here are those of the speakers themselves.
So I'll tell you what, there are many things that keep me inspired, and we can talk after. But what keeps me inspired, connected to this conversation, is my infinite delight in discovery of the new. Right, that history is not written in stone. The history books are not closed. That we still have the ability, even sitting here on February 1, 2025, to know, to explore, to dig, to search our past. Our librarians, our archivists, our curators are there for us to help us find ways to answer our questions in our own way. And so I'm someone, when I'm looking for inspiration, almost always find it, in those artifacts of the past. They help me remember where we've been, and what we've been through, as a nation. They introduce me to people who have been the agents of transformation and change. They remind me that in no moment, right, is human history fixed or predetermined. And some of those are inspiring, some of those are mixed with a great deal of, as we used to say, blood, sweat, and tears. But I think the histories might do that for you, but I think going back to Douglas and reading Douglas, right? And on, reading Lincoln, right? Reading whomever. But there are many, the Library of Congress has been long engaged in a transcription projects of its manuscript collections. And so now those are much more accessible than they were. The correspondence of Danielle Allen always reminds, it's Abigail and John Adams. Their correspondence is digitized by I think the Massachusetts
Mass Historical.
Yeah, Massachusetts Historical Society, and you can read their letters. And I think that for me, this is just always a place to go to learn, but also to reflect, right, and to have the company of the past, in whatever it is that we might be facing going forward. It's my way.
I'm also going to throw in that Martha's books are very inspirational themselves. I read Vanguard when we were working on an exhibit here at the museum called When Women Lost the Vote, focusing on a time period in New Jersey when both women and free people of African descent who had a certain amount of property were able to vote. And looking back at Martha's book and the sort of building story of Black women and political engagement was a very powerful, I think, opportunity to feel inspired and remember all of the shoulders that I myself and other people are standing on. And thinking about your book, The Pursuit of Happiness, and thinking about the ways in which the founders were looking back to Greek and Roman philosophers and building these lists of virtues and trying to live them out in their own lives. Now I find myself thinking, which virtues should I really have on my list? And can I be better than Ben Franklin at accomplishing them?
Well, it is very inspiring to see that these men and women, although they fell short of their ideals in so many ways, were constantly struggling to become more perfect, more industrious, more thoughtful, more virtuous. And that inspired me to get up earlier and try to read more and learn more. And it's inspired a lot of other people. I've just finished a new book called The Pursuit of Liberty, how Hamilton versus Jefferson ignited the lasting battle over power in America. And it traces Hamilton and Jefferson's initial battle between national power and states' rights, liberal and strict construction of the Constitution, and democracy versus rule by elites throughout American history like golden and silver threads. And what's so ultimately inspiring is that although people invoked Hamilton and Jefferson at all the crucial moments of American history, and they often betrayed their ideals, they were constantly aspiring to become more perfect in the future. And Hamilton and Jefferson provided a grounds for civil dialogue, for viewing each other as civic friends rather than enemies that inspired people. At the end of his life, after Hamilton dies in the duel, Jefferson places a bust of Hamilton across his own bust in the center hall of Monticello. And whenever he passes it and he's old, he says, opposed in life as in death, he viewed Hamilton not as an enemy, but as a friendly opponent to be debated with rather than banished. So that's one grounds for hope, that we live in a world that is constrained by this history of principle constraining politics, and we can always do better in the future. The other truth is that American history has always been a time for testing, and the success of the experiment is never guaranteed. I had a great teacher in college, Sack Van Berkovich, who was a scholar of the Puritans, who wrote a wonderful book called The American Jeremiad. And he notes that just as the prophet Jeremiah denounced the Israelites for having forsaken the covenant, so patriots throughout American history have also denounced Americans for having fallen short of our ideals, but in the process of the denunciation is the hope of recovering the ideals in the future. So you have Joseph Warren dressed in a toga at the time of the Revolution, denouncing the colonists for having fallen short of the ideals of the Declaration and urging them to do better in the future. You have John Quincy Adams in that Jeremiah I quoted. And then think of the 50-year anniversaries. 1826, Jefferson and Adams have just died within hours of each other, and the beginnings of civil war are brewing. 1876, the country almost came apart because the election is so contested, decided by a single vote of a Supreme Court justice. There might be another civil war, and yet we move forward. 1926, Calvin Coolidge, wondering whether greed and materialism have overtaken the country, and then the bicentennial 1876 in the face of Watergate. There's never been a time of guaranteed success of the American experiment, but isn't it inspiring? I mean, this discussion is so inspiring. As Martha said, we can all learn more, we can try ourselves to become more perfect, and we can inspire each other to live up to these ideals.
Thank you for that. I'll also call out, while we're heading in the direction of one of our other commenters, one person online is suggesting the Howard Zinn Education Project for folks looking for resources. So, be dropping other suggestions into the chat, be dropping them here in the room. What were you about to say, Martha?
I said here to Zinn.
To Howard Zinn.
Which is to say, for me, Zinn has been the opportunity, the conduit to K through 12 educators across the country,
The
because
people's
they are
history of the United
convening
States.
people and being able to talk about some of these ideas with folks who are then in classrooms every day. It's great.
Thank you. All right, we've got a comment or a question.
I'm going to expose my age a little bit as I wrote my question down on my phone. But everyone on the panel spoke about the ideals of the Constitution and the responsibility we have to reflect back on the virtues of our founders. And John Adams worried that division of the Republic into two great parties is to be dreaded as the great political evil. And my question would be, how do you feel now about the now established two-party system? And furthermore, should we as a people strive to change it? And how is it affecting our country? Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I was hoping that was a comment, but that was a question, Jeff. You want?
Should I give it a try? Okay. You're so right to quote Adams, who shared the founders' fear of parties and faction. And remembered Madison in Federalist 10, the central thing that they're trying to avoid is faction. He defines as any group, a majority or a minority, animated by passion rather than reason, devoted to self-interest rather than the public good. And George Washington in the farewell address warns that unless Americans can recover self-mastered virtue, then will descend into factions and go the way of Greece and Rome. Every previous republic has fallen, has surrendered its liberties to demagogues in exchange for cheap luxury because we're too selfish, too focused on our own immediate self-interests. We attach ourselves to partisan leaders and don't tend to the public good. So that's been the enduring challenge from the very beginning. And the party system has a complicated history. How is it possible that Madison, who denounces parties, then presides over the formation of the first party, the Republican Democratic Party? He comes to believe that parties are inevitable in any republic. And in fact, by aggregating people of differing points of view around a shared devotion to democracy, he thinks that the Democratic Republican Party can defend Republican ideals rather than challenging them. And for much of American history, the Republican and Democratic parties have aggregated people of different geographic and racial and ethnic and other interests in ways that have sometimes productively led to pluralistic deliberation. Now we are in one of the most polarized times in American history. We're more polarized than at any time since the Civil War. And we know what happened then. The war came, as Lincoln said. When we become too polarized, too devoted to party allegiance, and in particular to particular party leaders rather than to broader ideals, and when we stop deliberating with each other and listening to each other and recognizing that the other side is not an enemy to be defeated, but a friend to be deliberated with, there's always the danger of violence. And it really is remarkable how principle has constrained power, but when it's failed, violence has resulted in American history. So these are serious times. It's not the existence of parties that threatens violence, but the decline of a commitment to dialogue, of a civic disposition in America. And that's why civics is so important, not just to learn the dates or even the stories, and the stories are very important. It's to learn the habits of deliberation, to listen to the other side, to disagree without being disagreeable, to recognize that you don't have to agree with the other side in order to engage with them. And that's what part of what we're all trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. When I think about your question, I think about it through the lens of Black history. And I think the story I would tell really complicates the notion that our political culture is one constructed out of the two-party system at all. You know, in the decades before the Civil War, by and large, Black men are excluded from the State House and from Congress. Well, they build what comes to be called the Colored Convention movement, a parallel political culture of meetings, of deliberations, of resolutions, of manifestos that is not affiliated or subsumed into any political party. It is its own dimension and facet of American political culture writ large. If we get to the end of 19th century, as Black Americans are being deeply, deeply disappointed by the Republican Party, deeply, deeply targeted by Democrats, we have extraordinary figures like William Monroe Trotter who are going to create independent parties and not and reject the menu, right, that's being offered up. And so there's a strong tradition of independent politics among Black Americans. In the 20th century, you know, some of the women I write about in Vanguard who, for a time, who had been suffragists and big advocates of women's votes, strong adherents to the Republican Party, are profoundly disappointed when it turns out after the 19th Amendment they still cannot cast ballots. Well, they join Marcus Garvey and become Garveyites and become part of a political movement that is not national but transnational, and really takes a Pan-African point of view. So I think that with all due respect, right, the characterization of our political past as one that has somehow been can be explained by way of a two-party system is to have a pretty narrow definition of politics, and in particular is to overlook or to disregard the ways in which Black Americans have again and again and again generation after generation constructed autonomous, independent, alternative political cultures in an effort to shape our world, right? But not to do so only by a deference to a two-party structure.
What's exciting about your response is, number one, that it shows us that there's so much research and so much information out there that is like still waiting for so many people to discover. I think, for example, about all of the work on the Colored Conventions Project. I think is it the University of Delaware that's working on this?
And now
or-
it's over at Penn State with
Yeah.
Gabrielle Foreman, Dr. Gabrielle Foreman.
This amazing work that is now being put online so that we can better understand this colored conventions
That's right.
movement.
You can read all the minutes and the news coverage and more, and then
Yeah.
again, interpretive essays, biographies. It's a beautiful, beautiful resource.
It is fantastic. And I think the other exciting thing about your response is the fact that we don't necessarily have to feel like we have to be a part of the system as it is today. We can envision so many other possibilities and see what we can make of them. So I want to be aware of time. I think that we are about at the limits of our conversation. Maybe we end with that sense of hopefulness that there is so much possibility out there, and invite our folks who are in the room to continue the conversation with their speakers at the conclusion of our program. For those of you who are joining us online, continue to drop your comments, your questions, and everything into the chat, and we will gather all of those up and see what we can do with them. So thank you for the comments expressed here and online, the questions that you shared. With this, let's thank our speakers, Jeff Rosen and Martha Jones. And I will invite Lonnie back up to the stage. Thank you both. Thank you.
Very well. Yeah. Now I see you're sidebarring over here. Well, first of all, wasn't that a great conversation, everybody? And give yourselves a round of applause for some of the very intriguing questions. Really, I enjoyed it. You know, one of the things I enjoy best when working for the trust is being able to spend meaningful time alongside my family for something we are all passionate about, preserving the history of the Dennis Farm and sharing it. Daryl Gore, Vice President of Development, he's as dedicated to the history and preservation as anyone. Most notably, Daryl serves as project manager for the America 250 PA placement of our semi-quincentennial bell we were honored to receive recently in recognition of this country's 250th anniversary celebration, which will take place in 2026. And he is currently working with the architectural firm who is transforming the 200-plus-year-old family farmhouse into an interactive public space. He too, this is Denise, is my first cousin, a man of many hats, but I ask you to please welcome Daryl at this time.
Wow. Thank you, Lonnie. And thank you all for spending time with us today. You know, I always say when you learn something new, it's a good day. And today was mighty good day. Well, Lonnie has introduced me. So I just want to introduce myself. I'm Daryl Gore. I'm the Vice President of Development for the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust. On the slide that you see behind me, you see the past, present, and what we plan to be the future of the Henry W. and Angeline Perkins house. Our goal is to restore this house and use it as a public space to share the rich history of the Perkins Dennis family, as well as the history of African Americans in Susquehanna County and Northeast PA. The bottom image is one of the many visions and drawings that have been developed by our architect, HC Architects of Scranton, Pennsylvania. The restored of this restored Perkins Dennis house. Thanks to their hard work and collaboration with the Dennis Farm Charitable Land Trust team, we have now completed the architectural plans and much of the site work that is to begin for our construction. We are on track to begin the physical restoration of the house in the spring of this year, with our objective of opening the Perkins Dennis house in time for the America 250 celebration in July of 2026. We hope to do this in conjunction with the celebrations of the American 250 PA semi-sesquicentennial. However, we won't be able to make these goals without the help of you and your friends. At the bottom of this slide, you see that there is a QR code. If you take your opportunity to pull out your smartphones and take a picture of this code, that will take you to the Dennis Farm website where you can make a contribution to the Dennis Farm. We've also left cards on your table that you can take with you with envelopes if you'd like to make a more conventional contribution in the mail. We would also like you to consider becoming a member of the Museum of American History, a Museum of the American Revolution, this wonderful organization. We have been partners with this organization now for what, 7 years? 7 years. And not only do they host this forum every year, but we have educational programs where members of the students of the museum actually come to the Dennis Farm. We'd also like to invite you to the Dennis Farm. If you reach out to us through the website, we can arrange, have docents give you tours of the farm. So we can encourage you to becoming a member of the Museum of American Revolution, but also become members and friends of the Dennis Farm. In these times, your support is more important than ever. Funding for nonprofits is starting to dry out from the government, and we have to continue to pursue other sources. So we're asking for your help in this matter. That's all I really have to say. I'll give this back to Lonnie for closing our.
Thank you, Daryl. Did everyone enjoy themselves today? Another round of applause, please, for our panelists, Martha Jones, Jeffrey Rosen, and our moderator, Adrienne Whaley. Just a phenomenal panelist discussion. I want to give a special thank you to the Museum of American Revolution for hosting this event, and to the caterer who took care of you all today, Brule. Give them a round of applause, please, for the special thank you to Team Condren Team Condren Media for preparing the folders, tracking registrations, and all-around assistance with coordinating today's event. Thank you to all the attendees, both in person and our live stream audience. As a reminder, please complete your surveys, which are found inside your folders before you leave. We appreciate your feedback, which helps us to guide and plan for future programming. Also, if you're a high school or college student, please submit your video contests entry to be eligible for the first, second, and third place monetary award that I discussed earlier. Again, we will announce the winners shortly after the February 8th deadline to submit and contact the winners individually to coordinate delivery of your award. The contest rules, once again, can be found inside your folder for your reference. In closing, thank you again just for attending this forum. Hopefully, we have all gained a better appreciation and understanding of the Declaration of Independence and who we are as the people and what each of us has had to sacrifice or contribute toward making this the greatest country despite our shortcomings. And finally, I'd like to share with you a quote from a young poet. Some of you may be familiar with her name, Amanda Gorman, who recited the following: "There is always light, only if we are brave enough to see it. There is always light, only if we are brave enough to be it." So I thank you again for attending today's forum. Have a blessed remainder of your day, safe travels, and go Eagles! Good.